A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines.
If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. A different drummer.
And now, coming to you from dead center on your dial, welcome to Risk Parity Radio, where we explore alternatives in asset allocations for the do-it-yourself investor. Broadcasting to you now from the comfort of his easy chair, here is your host, Frank Vasquez.
Thank you, Mary, and welcome to Risk Parity Radio. If you have just stumbled in here, you will find that this podcast is kind of like a dive bar of personal finance and do-it-yourself investing.
Expect the unexpected.
It's a relatively small place. It's just me and Mary in here. And we only have a few mismatched bar stools and some easy chairs. We have no sponsors, we have no guests, and we have no expansion plans.
I don't think I'd like another job.
What we do have is a little free library of updated and unconflicted information for do-it-yourself investors.
Now, who's up for a trip to the library tomorrow?
So please enjoy our mostly cold beer served in cans and our coffee served in old chipped and cracked mugs, along with what our little free library has to offer. But now onward, episode 404. Today on Risk Parity Radio, we're just going to try to do what we do best here and catch up on this gigantic pile of emails that's been accumulating since January. See if we can knock off a couple of extra ones today. But just one little reminder, if you are attending the Economy Conference in a couple of weeks in Cincinnati, we're putting together a little meetup group for listeners of this podcast.
Yeah, baby, yeah!
Probably on Friday afternoon. A very informal affair.
Can you take hats in a dignified and sophisticated manner?
You mean like a weenie? Okay. May I take your hat, sir? May I take your hat, sir?
Right now, it looks like we'll have at least about a dozen people. I'm not promoting it or advertising it outside of talking about it on this podcast, because I think it makes more sense if it's a smaller group of people that actually listen to this podcast. But feel free to bring any friends that you wish to bring, if you happen to have any friends.
Inconceivable!
Anyway, if you're interested in that, please send an email to frank@riskparityradio.com. That email is frank@riskparityradio.com. And I'll add you to the group list, and then I'll be sending out an email about that on the week of, and we'll go from there. But now, without further ado.
Here I go once again with the email.
And
First off,
we have an email from Caleb. And Caleb writes,
Good morning. Love the pod. Question about asset allocation in different tax buckets. I don't feel this has really been explained in detail on your pod. I mean, once retired and for regular withdrawals. Typical FIRE folks recommend just stocks and brokerage, and any bonds or other assets in retirement vehicles for taxes. Assuming I have enough in my brokerage to float 5 years of Roth conversions while also potentially weathering a downturn, is 100% stocks recommended in brokerage, or do you recommend just ignoring taxes and maintaining your whole portfolio AA in any account as possible? If this is the case, is it just due to not wanting to sell stocks at a loss? I'm thinking 100% stocks in brokerage, and if I sell at a loss, I'd just be buying more in retirement vehicles to rebalance. Thanks.
Well, what you're primarily talking about here, Caleb, is called tax location, which differs from allocation. And we have talked about it before. Check out episodes 77, 322, and 398. But I don't mind talking about it again.
you need somebody watching your back at all times.
The basic procedure that makes sense for most people is to treat all of your investable assets as one big portfolio, regardless of what account type they are in, whether they're in a retirement account, a traditional retirement account, or a Roth account, or a brokerage account. And after you've decided how you want your assets allocated in your portfolio as one big overall portfolio, one of the next steps is to determine, all right, for that asset class, which account should it go in to minimize taxes? And that is the process of tax location. The mistake people make is trying to have each account look like the overall portfolio, and that's not very tax efficient. Now, obviously, depending on who you are, you may have more or less room in each of these account types, so you have to modify it for your circumstances. But essentially, what you want to do is take anything that is paying ordinary income or high income and put that first in your traditional retirement accounts. And the reason you want it to go there is, first, these are typically not growth assets. They're typically your bonds, managed futures, and other things like that. And when you take that income out of your traditional retirement account, you're going to have to pay ordinary income tax on it anyway, regardless of the type of income or whether it came out of a capital gain originally. But in the meantime, as long as you're not taking it out of the account, you don't have to pay any taxes on that ordinary income at all. So it's most efficient to put all of your ordinary income payers first into those traditional retirement accounts. For your Roth accounts, you typically put your best growing assets in those. And most people tend to have limited space in their Roth accounts, so you're usually talking about equity index funds. Or maybe you have something speculative that you think is going to grow a lot, like a cryptocurrency or something like that. You could put that in the Roth too.
You have a gambling problem.
But the idea is you're never going to be paying any taxes on that. That is likely to be one of the last things you touch. And so you want to put your highest growth assets in the Roth, regardless of whether they're paying ordinary income or any income. So that leaves your taxable account. Now, in your taxable account, income is generally undesirable. So things that don't pay any income can go in your taxable account. But also things that pay qualified dividends in order to take advantage of that favorable tax treatment of a qualified dividend, which gets taxed at long-term capital gains tax rates. You want to put that one in your taxable brokerage account, or it is appropriate to put that in your taxable brokerage account. So most people have a lot of index funds type investments in their taxable accounts because they pay low dividends, and if they pay dividends, they're qualified dividends. Now, this often leads to the next question of then when you're trying to draw down on these and you want to sell something in the retirement account, but you don't want to actually take money out of the retirement account to incur a tax bill, you can do what's called an asset swap. And rather than try to explain that on a podcast, I'm going to link to a convenient video prepared by one of our listeners, Justin.
The best, Jerry, the best.
Which explains this on a short YouTube video with little charts and is a lot easier to understand than trying to listen to it on a podcast. But rest assured, there is a way to sell something in a retirement account without actually taking it out of a retirement account and using it for your retirement spending. Now, you didn't mention what age you are. It sounds like from your email that you are much younger than 59 and a half, and so are thinking about a 5-year Roth conversion ladder and some of those other features. And that is one way to get access to retirement accounts early. Another way is to use Provision 72T, which allows you to access traditional retirement accounts early without paying a penalty, although you would have to pay some taxes on it. That has become a more flexible and viable strategy than it used to be. And I will see if I can link to a video by Sean Mullaney or something like that, who's the FI tax guy, who does really good explanations as to how to use that. If you're not familiar with the Mad Fientist post about how to get money early out of retirement accounts, I'd also take a look at that. I'll see if I can link to that in the show notes. But rest assured, there are many options for getting money out of retirement accounts early. And so it's not something you should get overly concerned with. It's just a problem to be managed. It's not an insurmountable problem. So in sum, you do not want to ignore taxes when you're doing this. But on the other hand, you do not want to let the tax tail wag the investment dog. So you should be selecting your investments on a non-tax basis and your portfolio on a non-tax basis first, and then allocating for taxes. The exception there would be somebody who has extremely high income in retirement, so they're going to be in the highest tax brackets. If you're going to have a retirement income of, say, more than $500,000 annually, which probably does not affect too many of you, then you are going to be needing to look at some advanced tax strategies and taking taxes more into account than someone else who is not in that category. If your income is going to be below around $50,000, adjusted gross income around $100,000 for a married couple, then you may be able to take advantage of tax gain harvesting because you're going to be in such a low long-term capital gains bracket. You'll be in the 0% bracket for that. And that's another thing you can think about. And you might want to check out episodes 68, 261, and 375 for more discussion of those. Incidentally, you can search the entire catalog of podcasts and show notes on the Risk Parity Radio podcast webpage. And there's also a link to the RSS feed where you'll see all of the episodes on one page. Do not try to open that in your phone. It's too big. Open it in a browser on a laptop, and you can word search it to your heart's content and find all kinds of things.
We got a scary one for you this week.
So it actually sounds like you're on the right track here. Hopefully all of that helps. And thank you for your email.
Alles klar, Herr Kommissar.
Second off, we have an email from a mysterious visitor number 4565, who apparently has no name.
I have no name.
Well, that right there may be the reason you've had difficulty finding gainful employment.
And visitor 4565 writes,
My sister just recommended your podcast to me. I am just 3 minutes into your latest podcast and could not be more annoyed.
Do not implore him for compassion.
You have wasted 3 minutes inserting stupid sound clips.
Do not beg him for forgiveness.
How can I take you seriously with all this, not to mention the waste of time?
Do not ask him for mercy.
Time which is so very limited to many. Not sure I will continue, but you may want to think about reducing some of this nonsense.
Let's face it, you can't talk him out of anything.
Truly, the first 3 minutes are almost all silly clips.
This is pretty much the worst video ever made.
Napoleon, like anyone can even know that. You know what, Napoleon? You can leave.
You guys are retarded.
Well, I'm sorry you don't like it, but it sounds like that this podcast is really not for you. As most of my listeners know, this podcast is not a commercial endeavor, but a retirement hobby. So everything I do here is for fun.
And you won't be angry?
I will not be angry.
And my primary audience is actually my adult children.
Way, look! It's Woodward!
What?
Woodward's going to work.
Where does he work? What, the Woosty Web?
What's that supposed to be? Some kind of stupid secret code?
We can't tell you because you're not a member of the club.
Oh, yeah? What does it take to be a member? Besides being a moron.
And some various friends and family who find me entertaining and my antics to be entertaining.
You are talking about the nonsensical ravings of a lunatic mind.
I realize that's not everyone's cup of tea.
Well, I took the liberty of putting away something in your tea.
What are you talking about?
I'm putting you to sleep.
Now, the other group of people who like to listen to this tend to be very successful investors, and some of them are actually financial advisors. And what they appreciate is unvarnished opinions from someone who is used to cross-examining financial experts And so I've read a lot more material about investing than most people, including things like CFA manuals and academic papers and a lot of material produced by professionals in the financial services industry who do this for a living, in addition to the typical personal finance voices. So it looks like I have between 1,500 and 2,000 loyal listeners now, and that is far more people than I ever expected to listen to this. And so that is more than enough for me, because I would rather have a smaller, fully engaged audience than try to appeal to the masses.
That is the straight stuff, oh Funkmaster.
Because I don't have anything for sale. I don't have a need to attract sponsors, and I'm not looking to try to get any podcast awards.
Forget about it.
As I recently discussed on the Catching Up to 5 podcast I appeared on last weekend with my friend Bill Yount, this podcast is kind of like the Grateful Dead, the band The Grateful Dead, that a few people really, really like the Grateful Dead, and a lot of people really don't like the Grateful Dead, and it's kind of like licorice. Some people really like it, a lot of people don't.
Now, how can you explain this culture that has followed you, and they're so dedicated, they just are still
I can't explain it. They aren't the same people, you know. I mean, also, it's not as though we have a bunch of 40-year-old hippies.
No, but it's like
the same kind of people.
Right?
Though.
Yeah.
I think that's the key to it. You know, there's a certain kind of person. You know, maybe in every generation or whatever. I really don't quite know how to split it up, but there's a certain kind of person that likes what we do. You know, it's like there are a certain kind of people who like licorice, you know, or a certain kind of people who like buttermilk or something, you know. And it might not be something that everybody likes, but there are certain kind of people that really do like it.
And that's okay. We have enough licorice eaters already, and I'm very happy to provide the licorice, if you will.
Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit amphetamines.
But you will still have to put up with my antics, for better or for worse. If you do want to get a background of what we're talking about here, I would go back and listen to episodes 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, or the AI version of that, which is episode 400. And you will find that those are mostly refreshingly, antic-free. Anyway, I'm sorry you didn't like it, but thank you for your email all the same.
Trucking, got my chips cashed in, keep trucking, like the Doodah Man together. More or less in line, just keep trucking on.
Next off, we have an email from Paul.
For a guy who moved all day long, Paulie didn't talk to 6 people. If there was a union problem or, say, a beef in the numbers, then only the top guys can meet with Paulie to discuss the problem. Everything was one-on-one. Paulie hated conferences.
And Paul writes,
Hola, Frank. Have you read Don Cox's 2003 book, New Reality of Wall Street? Gold is in chapters 9 and 10.
I love gold!
Don was a strategist with Harris and BMO and an avid historian. Wrote a monthly newsletter entitled Basic Points.
Yes!
Well, Paul, considering that book is from 2003, I may have read it. I don't recall it specifically, but I did go back and consult some artificial intelligence bots to remind me what was in it, and in particular what it had to say about gold. And I'll read you a couple of summary things. One of the things it points out is gold as a safe haven asset. Cox views gold as a reliable source of value, especially during times of crisis, given the geopolitical risks such as the post-9/11 world and the potential for inflation. He argues that gold would become an increasingly important asset for investors seeking to protect their wealth from economic turmoil. And then under the category of gold as a long-term investment, Cox discusses gold as part of a long-term strategy. He stresses that while gold may not always be the most exciting or high-return asset, its value tends to appreciate during times of uncertainty. For this reason, he suggests that gold could be a prudent asset to include in a diversified portfolio for those concerned with preserving capital over time. He also notes that gold is something good for times of global financial instability, declining confidence in paper currencies, and because there is increasing demand in emerging markets. And so, yes, I agree with all those things. And that is very similar to the kind of information that I was researching about this around 2010 to 2013. That if you research somebody that really took this topic seriously and wasn't going off on some narrative or quip about it, it was pretty clear that for long-term diversified portfolios that gold had a place in them. And as we learned from Karsten Jeska's Safe Withdrawal Rate Series number 34, which we discussed in episodes 12 and 40, that gold also tends to increase the safe withdrawal rate of a stock and bond portfolio. So the fact that gold is having a day in the sun right now is not something that is surprising. The only thing surprising about it is when it's going to happen, because you can't predict that. But if you believe that there will be economic uncertainty, whether today or in the future, and that gold will benefit from it for various reasons, then it makes sense to hold some in your portfolio. Not because it's exciting or you think it's going to go up, but because you think it's going to be reliable and also uncorrelated from both stocks and bonds. Now, I realize people in personal finance land don't like to hear this.
You can't handle the dogs and cats living together.
And they like to stick their fingers in their ears and yell, blah, blah, blah. It's a worthless metal.
You're insane, gold member.
And you can do that all you like, but it's not going to change reality.
You can't handle the truth.
Which we are getting a big dose of right now.
Real wrath of God type stuff.
What's also interesting to me about that book, or any book written in a specific time frame, is that these books always have something that is relevant to the long term, but then they have something that is so myopically focused on what is going on at the particular time, it doesn't age well. And in that book, he was kind of predicting that, well, China's on the rise and the U.S. is in decline, and that's the way it's going to be in the future. And that was kind of true for that decade, but, after that, we saw the rise of all the U.S. tech companies, and the U.S. has been the best performer in the past 15 years. So you'd have to say that part of that book did not age well. However, the part about gold certainly did age well and is actually not something that was new at the time then or is new now. And it's something that has been said by many people and many very knowledgeable people. So this reminded me of another excellent book I read. It's about 10 years old now. I think it came out in 2013 or 2015. It is called The Aspirational Investor, Taming the Markets to Achieve Your Life's Goals. And it was written by Ashvin Chabra, who at the time or shortly before was the chief investment officer at Merrill Lynch. So again, we're talking about somebody who's an industry professional who you should really be listening to, and not some personal finance guru who spends a lot of time worshiping the god of simplicity and not spending money. One of the things recommended in that book was approaching long-term investing for retirement as a diversification puzzle and including things like gold in your diversified portfolio. So I would definitely put that on your recommended reading list if this is a topic you care about. And it probably is if you're listening to this.
That's the fact, Jack! That's the fact, Jack!
I will link to that in the show notes to make it easy. But I think what you should ultimately appreciate is that what I talk about in this podcast is not things that I've invented or came up with. All I'm doing is summarizing, copying, and in some cases dumbing down what very smart, intelligent people who are actually in the financial services industry have been saying for decades. And this is some of the stuff I learned when I was studying this topic between the years of about 2009 and about 2017 to decide what kind of portfolio we should hold in retirement. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, and thank you for your email.
I'd like to help you out. Look, what do you want from me? What am I going to do? Tommy's a bad kid. He's a bad seed. What am I supposed to do, shoot him? That wouldn't be a bad idea.
Next off, we have an email from Michael. Michael from Scotland.
Welcome to All Things Scottish. Our slogan is, if it's no Scottish, it's crap!
And Michael from Scotland writes,
Hi, Frank. Ray Paul 393. Check out ticker USSC equals SPDR MSCI USA Small Cap Value Weighted UCITS ETF. Find on justetf.com, which is the best ETF search tool for the UK.
A real man doesn't wear shoes.
Yeah, well, a real man doesn't wear a skirt.
Oh, how very clever. But I don't know why you'd say something like that, knowing that I might come after you with butchering tools.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. One of the things I'm relatively ignorant on is how people outside of the United States can get access to various asset classes in their local jurisdictions or otherwise, because they may not have access to U.S. ETFs. And I always feel bad about this when people ask me questions about it, because I am fairly ignorant about everything that is available in other countries besides the United States. But this site, justetf.com, that you provided for us, I think is a very excellent resource. And I would definitely look at that if you were outside the United States, and particularly in the Greater Britain area.
If it's no Scottish, it's crap!
Because you have certainly found what others have been asking for in episode 393 and others. And this is always why I say we have the finest podcast audience available.
Top drawer. Really top drawer.
So thank you for that reference, and thank you for emailing it in.
Scotch is a drink. Scots are a people. But we're both quite tasty.
Last off,
an email from Jamie.
I see you brought up reinforcements. Well, I'm waiting for you, Jimmy boy.
And Jamie writes,
I was quite confused after listening to episode 394. Easily done. You talked about U.S. versus international values being tied to the USD when U.S. did well, international did worse, and vice versa over longish periods of time. Isn't this exactly what you want from diversification and negative correlation? As an aside, it would be cool to have a discussion board for each episode where things like this could be discussed by this top drawer, really top drawer audience.
Well, you haven't got the knack of being idly rich. You see, you should do like me. Just snooze and dream, dream and snooze. The pleasures are unlimited.
Well, thank you for following up on this, because I think there is some confusion out there. I hope I relieved some of it with the last episode, episode 403, where Mark had asked a question about weaker dollar and how that affected stocks. But the question here really goes to what kind of diversification is most important to have in a portfolio, particularly on the stock side of your portfolio, because the typical 20-year-old recommendation is to have a large cap U.S. fund, like an S&P 500 fund, and then some kind of large cap international fund. But the problem with that is really not that well diversified. And the main source of the diversification there is simply the currency speculation, that when the dollar is weaker, international tends to outperform the U.S., and when the dollar is stronger, U.S. tends to outperform international. Now, that does not mean they're negatively correlated. That may be the confusion. It just means one is relatively better than the other based on the dollar. And if you took out the currency speculation, they would be performing about the same, and they would show even less diversification than they already show. That the source of their diversification is this currency speculation. So no, they are not negatively correlated. I think that's the error in your thinking there, the confusion you have. Which leads to the question, well, is that the best form of diversification we can have with respect to our equity funds? And the answer to that is no. Particularly when you're talking about down markets. The better form of diversification to be focused on with your equities is value versus growth, whether those are domestic or international stocks, particularly when you're talking about your drawdown phase. Because what you will see, particularly in bad years like 2022 or the years 2000 to 2002, is that The general stock markets are generally driven by the growth funds. And when the stock markets are going down, it is often true that value will outperform growth by 20 points or more in that year. And that is really good diversification. And so that is what you should be focused on first with respect to your equity allocation, is value versus growth. Now, you can add domestic versus international also in that context, although bear in mind that almost all of the large cap growth stocks in the world happen to be U.S. stocks. It's all those big tech companies. So it's hard to get a lot of international large cap growth outside of the U.S., although there are a couple of funds like EMQQ and IDMO, and we talked about a few more in recent episodes. What's probably more interesting is that it's relatively easy now to get nice international value funds like AVDV or AVES from Avantis, and DFA has some similar funds. I will link again to Paul Merriman's best ETFs in class list, and you can see a whole bunch of them there. But I think that's how you want to pick or prioritize your picks in your equity portfolio, is first value versus growth, then small versus large, and then international versus domestic. And you can mix and match those any way you want. But to be standing around saying in 2025 that the best way to diversify your equity portfolio is to hold simply a large cap U.S. fund and a large cap international fund, that's just not correct.
Wrong!
The data doesn't support that.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
And there's no reason for you to be doing that just because somebody came up with it 15, 20 years ago, when that was really the only kind of options we had.
Right? Wrong!
So that kind of diversification is just no longer a best practice. No longer a best practice for a do-it-yourself investor.
Not going to do it. Wouldn't be prudent at this juncture.
Regardless of what these gurus who wrote books back then and want you to keep buying them keep saying about this.
Forget about it.
If you want to do better diversifying with your international funds, go use that nice list that Paul Merriman's got. I know they are updating it this year as well. And welcome to the 2020s. And now finally, as to your comment, it would be cool to have a discussion board for each episode where things like this could be discussed. Well, that might be cool, but you know how I am.
It's not that I'm lazy. It's that I just don't care.
Yeah, I don't want another job, and I certainly don't want that job.
I don't think I'd like another job.
Part of the joy of this being a hobby is that I am not creating lots more side work for myself besides this podcast and the minimalist website that I maintain.
It's crap!
There is actually a Facebook page for this where I throw up each of the podcasts, and I suppose people could start discussing them there, and I would participate if you put things there, but most people really don't want to do that. And one is a private board. I'm not putting together a private board.
What would you say you do here?
So sorry to disappoint you on that, but thank you for your email.
Looks like you've been missing a lot of work lately.
I wouldn't say I've been missing it, Bob.
Good one.
Oh, that's terrific, Peter. But now I see our signal is beginning to fade. If you have comments or questions for me, please send them to frank@riskparity.com. That email is frank@riskparity.com. Or you can go to the website, www.riskparity.com, put your message into the contact form, and I'll get it all that way. If you haven't had a chance to do it, please go to your favorite podcast provider and subscribe, give me some stars, a follow, a review.
That would be great. Okay.
Thank you once again for tuning in. This is Frank Vasquez with Risk Parity Radio, signing off.
Trucking, I'm going home. Whoa, whoa, baby, back where I belong. Back home, sit down and patch my bones and get back trucking.
The Risk Parity Radio Show is hosted by Frank Vasquez. The content provided is for entertainment and informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, tax, or legal advice. Please consult with your own advisors before taking any actions based on any information you have heard here, making sure to take into account your own personal circumstances.